It was a rainy, cold December day in 1942 when a large twin-engine aircraft descended slowly to Saratoga Passage, heading toward a new naval air seaplane base. The aircraft touched down on the water miles from the base, skimming on the step, then settled down and slowly taxied northward toward the base, while the crew watched for logs and deadheads. Finally, upon reaching the ramp, a beaching crew was waiting for the seaplane. The 104-foot wingspan PBY Catalina had beaching gear attached to the fuselage, and the seaplane was pulled up the ramp, tail first, to a tie-down spot. A group of officers and dignitaries welcomed the first PBY Catalina to NAS Whidbey's newly completed seaplane base. What followed is history. Since that day, hundreds of PBY Catalinas have flown in and out of NAS Whidbey Island, where crews have trained to be deployed to the Aleutians and North Pacific combat areas. America needed the PBY Catalina. Japanese forces had invaded American soil, and with no established airfields in the Aleutians, the PBY seaplane was the only naval aircraft available with a range capable of patrolling and bombing enemy installations and shipping. There have been attempts to memorialize this nearly forgotten piece of aviation history. In 1967, an attempt was made by a handful of PBY veterans to bring a PBY to the seaplane base as a memorial to the pilots and crews that trained at NAS Whidbey. Sadly, it did not materialize. Once again, in the spring of 1998, a PBY veteran with the same vision, once stationed at NAS Whidbey, made contact with a Whidbey Island historian who encouraged him to try again, this time with the help of the editor of the Crosswind. She published the story of the project, and as a result, PBY retirees and veteran pilots living on Whidbey called, expressing a desire to meet and discuss the idea. This led to the first meeting of a group that called themselves the PBY Veterans and Friends. That was September 22, 1998. It began with just 14 World War II veterans and their wives. Later, a draft was written, corporate papers and bylaws were drawn up, and on May 1999, the organization became the PBY Memorial Association, a Washington nonprofit corporation. The PBY organization continued meeting monthly at the CPO Club, published a monthly newsletter, and launched the membership drive. The new board agreed on an annual membership of $25. Later in 1999, the PBY Memorial Association applied for a 501c3 tax-exempt status. In just 3 months, it was awarded the certificate by the IRS. In November 2003, the PBY Memorial Association changed their status and became a foundation. By the fall of 2000, the PBY Memorial Foundation had assembled for 24 lunch meetings, mailed 25 editions of the newsletter, and celebrated their second anniversary with a banquet at the Nor'Wester on Alt Field. The scale model of the proposed memorial hangar, crafted from architect's drawings by one of our founding members, was unveiled at the banquet. The reality of what our mission could do energized everyone there who observed the finely detailed model of a future dream. Members began offering their artifacts, logbooks, photos, and making substantial donations. They believed in the mission. In 2001, we were on the lookout for PBYs from Canada to Arizona, Florida to Eastern Washington. They were there, but still out of reach. Then, at the 2002 Thunder on the Rock Air Show at NAS Whidbey, a PBY from the Tillamook Air Museum flew in and landed at Alt Field. It was the icon commemorating 60 years of operation since the day in 1942 when the seaplane base became operational and the first PBY landed on Crescent Harbor. Next to the stealth bomber, it was the most visited aircraft of the show, we were told. Some of the veterans posed in front of their beloved plane, now to be remembered in memoriam, as some of these fine World War II pilots and their crewmen have since passed on. Some of the younger generation even went aboard, including the pilot of the stealth bomber who said, "Now there's an airplane." Take note, you old Airedales. You never know who will be in the pilot seat of a vintage aircraft. Ladies make great pilots. Take a look at the women of World War II who flew the planes from factory to front. One day, a few members of our history committee were caught making notes on a napkin at a local coffee shop. A few months later, the notes were to become a script. What followed was to become a new documentary with video interviews of local farmers and townsfolk who were in Oak Harbor when the Navy came to town. The producer obtained historic photos from local sources and films from Navy archives. After months of painstaking editing and production, our very first motion picture, In Defense of Their Nation, was released. The premiere showing of the documentary was at the Elks Lodge to an audience of 200. Thanks to the sweat, sore feet, phone calls, and letters from one very dedicated fundraiser, soliciting donations from many businesses of Oak Harbor and PBY Memorial members, our documentary was a resounding success. Early in 2004, the PBY Memorial Organization moved into a historic gas station on Pioneer Way. After many weeks of cleaning, painting, new lighting, and a security system, the display bays soon filled with artifacts, models, photos, a flight simulator, and actual aircraft parts. Nearly all of the furniture was donated by local banks. Members brought in microwaves, a refrigerator, and a coffee maker. We were off and running. Then came a Pratt & Whitney radial engine from faraway Alabama. Perfect. It was a modified cutaway for training purposes. Navy mechanics from NAS got in the act, and when they saw a vintage round engine, they offered to refinish it to display quality on their own time. We began to look like a real aviation museum, although we don't call it that. It is really a memorial. Our original mission was to preserve the PBY and all seaplanes once based at the seaplane facility. It soon became apparent that we should include all aircraft based and flown from NAS Whidbey from 1942 to the present. We began adding artifacts, models, photos, and historical files of land-based planes and carrier aircraft once based at NAS Whidbey. The list began to grow, so why not preserve the entire aviation history of NAS Whidbey? We had filled every corner of the building on East Pioneer, and now our landlord asked for his building back. After 4 years, we had reached the limit, and we were ready for the next phase. It was time to relocate. Little did we know that someday we would end up where it all started, Building 12 on the seaplane base. We were now a part of the legacy of 1942. Thanks to the command, Public Works, and a lot of negotiating, we arrived at Phase 2. With the loan of a truck from a local moving business, the Oak Harbor Fire Service, and Navy personnel on their own time, the move to Building 12 was made in 3 days. We were temporarily settled on the west end of the building while contractors renovated the final site for our office and display rooms on the east end. That meant moving across the hall again. Navy Muscle and Vintage Car Club Group showed up and moved the heavy stuff to our final site. The very first sight you'll see when you enter Building 12 is World War II USO Canteen, complete with jukebox and Glenn Miller platters. Our main office is up and running, and we now have a library of historical books, documents, and photo files. Besides our very own t-shirts, totes, and official pins, we have an inventory of aircraft model kits, books, and postcards in our gift shop. Each display room will reflect an era of history, from World War II, the Korean conflict, Vietnam, and the Gulf War to the present. One room is set aside for the flight simulator, and that's just for starters. Finally, our dream is real aircraft in static displays as memorials to the squadrons and their crews that once flew from NAS Whidbey. Today, a decade and 250 members later, it is our vision this will become a center for Whidbey's naval aviation history.